University, a Master of Divinity degree from the Seventh-day Adventist Theological Seminary, a Master's of Science degree in Counseling Psychology from Bowie State University in Bowie, Maryland, and a Doctor of Ministry degree in Family Ministries from Andrews University. He is currently in the writing stage of completing his PhD in Counseling Psychology from Regent University. Dr. Defoe is a licensed counselor, educator, pastor, and entrepreneur. He is a creative, out-of-the-box thinker, and progressive leader. He believes his unique call and ministry is to live out the socially conscious gospel of Jesus Christ, which he believes is providing comfort to the afflicted and affliction to the comfortable.
All right, everyone. Well, I want to thank you all for continuing to introduce me. I feel almost like y'all haven't accepted me into the family because you keep telling people who I am. So I'll just continue to act like I'm a visitor. I want to thank you all for paying attention to me. Some of you all didn't get the Blockbuster right, but I still rent movies. If you still need something that they ain't got on Netflix yet, you can come on to Blockbuster, and I will definitely take your money and give you your VHS tape. I ain't got no more VHS tapes. Anyway, but it's good to see all of you on. I hope you had a restful and happy Sabbath. I spent my Sabbath at the beach, and so I definitely had a good time. Hopefully you could see my tan, probably not. Anyway, so I want to just get right into this topic because today this is actually my clinical specialty. This is my bag. This is what I enjoy doing, and so I'm going to try not to spend so much time today or take more time than I normally would take. My current even dissertation for my PhD is in spousal loss, young male spousal loss, and so. It's something that I'm inundated with. And so I hope that you get something from this today. But in way of just starting, I want to ask you all this question that I hope will generate some reflection for you all. If you all would just in the chat, put something that you are currently grieving, or even if you're not currently grieving something, but put something in the chat that you grieved before in the past. Just go on and put it in the chat. I'm going to actually wait because I want to see what comes out in the chat, because one of the most important things is that people who are grieving, they often feel like they are alone, that they're by themselves in their grief. And so as we experience community, I think that it's very important. So just go on. No one's going to judge you. What is something that you're currently grieving? Thank you for that. Elder Ferguson, just go on and place them in the chat. What is something that you're currently grieving as we talk about this end of mourning? Today, this end of mourning. So while we're doing that, and we're going to definitely wait for Sister Mundo Harvey, I see you on. God bless you. Still praying for you and your family for the tragic loss of your niece. So I want to just give you just a little Bible, and of course, many of us, we understand, or we've been where this character for our contemplation is currently. But here, Job, the 19th chapter, Job says something very interesting. And the truth of the matter is, let's just be honest, Job lost a whole lot of stuff. The Bible tells us that the devil goes and convinces God to let him touch Job, to not touch him physically, but to take things away from him. And Job loses his children. He loses his livestock. He loses his money. He loses everything but his life. And the Bible tells us in Job, the 19th chapter, that Job is now lamenting about his sorrow, and he creates this statement in Job the 19th chapter, and here it is: though I cry violence, I get no response. Though I cry for help, there is no justice. He's blocked my way so that I cannot pass. He has shrouded my paths in darkness. He stripped me of my honor and removed the crown from my head. It sounds like he's in pain, doesn't it? Take a look at this. He tears me down on every side till I'm gone. He uproots my hope like a tree. His anger burns against me and counts me among his enemies. This is the last verse before we get to the good part. He has alienated my family from me, and my acquaintances are completely estranged from me. My relatives have gone away. My closest friends have forgotten me. My guests and my female servants count me as a foreigner. They look on me as a stranger. I summon my servant, but he doesn't answer. Though I beg him with my own mouth, my breath is offensive to my wife. I'm loathsome to my own family. Even the little boys scorn me. When I appear, they ridicule you. All my intimate friends detest me. Those I had loved have turned against me. I am nothing but skin and bones. I've escaped only by the skin of my teeth. Now, we know from the context that Job is going through a real rough situation, a real rough challenge. He's grieving, right? And we know specifically from the story that Job has gotten himself to the point where he's ready to he's ready, or he's thinking about throwing in the towel. His friends are telling him to curse God and die. His wife is telling him to curse God and die. But Job comes with this great retort in Job 19 in verse 25, one of my favorites. Here it is. I know that my Redeemer lives, and that in the end, he will stand up on the earth. And after my skin has been destroyed, yet in my flesh will I see God. I myself will see him with my own eyes, and not another. How my heart yearns within me. What Job tells us is that he knows that there's going to come a day when God is going to rectify some of the problems and the challenges that we've gone through. And I think that two of the things that we get from the text is here's this first one. God is not absent as we go through our problems. I want us to always understand that even in the midst of our pain, in the midst of our difficulty, in the circumstances that seem to be out of our control, God is not absent. God is with us. He's always there. Amen. And the second thing that I want you to get from this before I get into sort of the psychological stuff about grief is this. We may not always feel that God is present with us, even in our pain, in our difficulty, in our losses. We may not feel that we may not feel his presence, but we can always access his power. We can always access his power. And so I just want to share those biblical things with you before we really jump into the context of what we're going to talk about today, this end of mourning. And the question that I have to ask for all of us is, what is grief? What is grief? Of course, it's something that has touched each and every one of us. For all of us, we have lost something. But I want to put these definitions on the screen so that you can see if you could resonate with them, right? Here it is. Grief is the normal and natural response to loss. Grief is a series of psychological, physical responses that occur following a loss. Here's the one that I want to sort of implant in your spirit so that you'll understand that for even those that aren't grieving someone to death, any significant change in any pattern of behavior or relationships creates grief. Grief is the conflicting feelings caused by the end of or a change in a familiar pattern of behavior. Some of us, we don't understand that losing a job creates grief. That moving from one place to another place creates grief. That getting divorced, even though we may be happy to get rid of someone, it creates grief in that now we have to define ourselves. We move from being a spouse to now we move to being single. Any significant change in any pattern of behavior creates grief, creates a loss. So I've heard it described this way, and this is from the Grief Recovery Handbook. Grief is the feeling of reaching out for someone who's always been there, only to discover that when I need them one more time, they're no longer there. It's also the contrary to that. Grief is the feeling of reaching out for someone who's never been there, and only to discover that they're still not there. One of the things that we have to understand about grief is, for many of us, we grieve not just people, but we grieve relationships. We grieve expectations that aren't realized. And so it's important for us to understand that as we go through this sort of discussion about grief this evening, right? So what are some of the common reactions to grief? What are some of the common reactions to grief? When we do think about loss, we think of loss through the death of people that we love, like I said, but loss is far more encompassing than a more far encompassing theme in our lives. For we lose not only through death, but we also lose by leaving and being left, by changing and letting go and moving on. And our losses include not only separations and departures from those that we love, but our losses of romance, our losses of dreams, our impossible expectations, our illusions of freedom and power, our illusions of safety. For some people, they lose trust. We're going to get into the different types of losses in a second, but I wanted to put up these common reactions to grief, right? People react to grief in these four different ways. And here they are. There are physical reactions to grief. There are emotional reactions to grief beyond just I'm crying or I'm sad. For some people, they get angry. For some people, they retreat. For some people, they get lonely. All right. So there's not only a physical response, an emotional response, but there's also a mental response. How many of you all have ever gotten bad news about something happening to someone that you love and you realize that you're not as sharp or as keen as you used to be? That now you're starting to forget something when you used to have the memory of an elephant. I had a client one time that got the news that her husband was in the hospital, and the journey that she made every single day from the office to the house was the exact same, but she ended up being on the other side of town, losing her way because she was so engulfed in the agony that she was experiencing by what was going on with her husband. So there's a mental component that is related to here. The studies have proven and shown to us that the productivity at work goes down when people are grieving. That it's a shame that we in America, we give people bereavement leave and we give them 3 days and expect them to come back in 3 days and act like everything is cool, copacetic, and calm. We can't do that, right? We're not wired to grieve and to lose people that way, right? So these are some of the common reactions to grief. And I want you to understand, and we'll talk about in a second, that not everyone grieves the same way. All right. So numbness and sadness or depression or tears or sobbing or anger, becoming accident prone. You see them on the screen, memory problems, loneliness, isolation, these feelings of powerlessness, right? All of these things are common reactions as we know them to grief. But I want to know from you all, right? What is something, as we talk about grief, what is something that you've heard about grief that you do not know is true or you question? What are some of the things that people tell you about grieving that doesn't make sense? Anyone ever heard that it just takes time? Anybody heard of that? Anyone ever heard that or anyone ever told someone that they should replace the loss? And so if I lost my dog or I lost my cat as a kid, my mom or dad brings home a new dog or a new cat thinking that should help me process the fact that I've lost my pet. And then the rest of my life, every time I grieve things, I just replace them, so that every time I lose a relationship, I just jump back into a new one because I was taught or conditioned to deal with my grief and my pain by just going and getting a new one. Anyone ever tries to drown their sorrow in eating, or drown their sorrows in something that's not really helpful, like drugs or alcohol? See, we all have an internal mechanism to try to help us to stave off the pain that we feel. And oftentimes, if we were to really take a look at it, if we were to go back in time to the very first time that we lost something or someone and how we responded to that, I would bet you that 8 times out of 10, the same way you responded to your first loss is the same way you're responding to your current losses. right? Because for many of us, we're taught these unhelpful things about how it is that we're to grieve. Anyone ever told you that you shouldn't cry or that you should be strong, as if somehow you crying is not a show of strength, right? Anyone ever tried to deal with their grief by staying busy? Really, all that it does is it distracts us from the heart work that we need to do. What it does is it takes our mind off of the pain we feel, but our body is still in pain. Our emotions are still in pain. Our psyche is still in pain. Our hearts are still in pain. So our mind takes over and we develop and we do all the things that we need to do and we work ourselves to death, but our heart is still hurting. And we talked about it on yesterday. We know that when we don't deal appropriately with our emotional responses, or when we don't talk about things, or when we don't unpack things, it comes out instead in negative behavior. And so I find myself being more snappy with people. I find myself being less engaged in my interpersonal relationships because I'm grieving or I'm hurt. Right. So there's many things that people tell us to try to help soothe our pain, because the truth of the matter is most people do not know what to say to you when you are grieving. Why? Because in order for me to be present with you in your grief, it may just trigger my own. And what I don't want to see is I don't want to see my pain. So the quicker I can get you to turn off your pain. So I tell you, oh no, don't cry. Or I reach for the tissue to help you wipe your tears away. Or I tell you, don't worry, God's got a plan. Or and Adventists are robbed of this. The person's in a better place. Unfortunately, we don't believe that. So we can't even comfort ourselves with that. But many people utilize those things to help us take our minds off of our grief, right? Okay. So let me just get through these really quickly. All right. So we talked about the common reactions to grief. Now, there are also different types of grief. And I want to just share some of these with you all, because I want you all to understand that grief is not just loss through death, right? There's normative grief. And of course, normative, and we don't want to categorize it, but normative grief is when we lose people to death. All right. There are material losses, which is an important attachment to a physical object. So if I lose something that's important to me, okay, let me just be honest. I used to own a 1992 Acura Legend. Man, I loved that car. As a matter of fact, if Acura would come back out with a Legend right now, I would be the first one in line to buy it. I don't even care the price, right? I'll steal from Elder Ferguson to go get me a new Acura Legend, right? I had those material losses where every car that I now own, I compare to it. Now, of course, it doesn't rise to the level of us losing people or anything else like that. But for many of us, we have an attachment to physical objects. And we have not yet grieved even those objects. And you may say, Defoe, how do you grieve an object? We're getting to it. Don't worry, right? We have abstract losses, the losses that cannot be seen, but are really actually real, right? We have relationship losses, not even through the death of a loved one, but through people who walked away, by relationships that have ended. We have functional losses where we lose our social network or the role that we had in our social network. For many people who retire, they are so excited the fact that they don't got to deal with those annoying people at work. But now I've lost a role. I can no longer define myself by what I do, because now what I do is retired. I don't even know what you do in retirement. I can't wait to find out, though, right? So there's normative grief, there's anticipatory grief. Anticipatory grief are those individuals who work with people on hospice, who know that there is something that is going to happen, or that there is an inevitability that I'm going to lose someone. Right? Then there's ambiguous loss, where someone is physically present, but they're not they're psychologically absent. The people who take care of people with dementia or Alzheimer's. This is the type of ambiguous loss that we're talking about, where the person is physically present, but they're now emotionally, cognitively, mentally, relationally gone. Right? There's complicated grief, and complicated grief, we don't really like to push it as much as we should. And the reason that we don't like to push it as much is because complicated grief, by definition, has a timed element to it. But one thing that we do know is there is no time associated with grief. There's no time that helps us get over or get beyond our losses. And the truth of the matter is we never really get over something, because as long as we have love, we have grief. Until the love dies, the grief can't die. So as long as I've been in a relationship with someone that I have loved, I will always remember, I will always grieve them, right? So time doesn't really enter into the equation. But here's this last one: disenfranchised grief or disenfranchised loss. And this is simply loss of things that are dismissed or unrecognized. And for many of us, we have to be honest that we are experiencing types of disenfranchised grief right now. COVID has robbed many of us of this word right here: normalcy. And for many people, the things that they used to do, the places that they used to go, the conversations they used to have, the situations they used to be able to involve themselves in, all of that is a figment of the past. For many of us, we've been in our homes for so long, and we're just now starting to come back out. But for many of us during COVID robbed us of our gift of normalcy. And the reason that we call this, or the reason this goes into this idea of disenfranchised loss, is because disenfranchised loss is oftentimes those losses that we feel guilty about feeling. So I feel guilty, but I can't go to work, but my neighbor down the street lost their mother or their father to COVID. And so I think I shouldn't grieve the fact that I can't go into the office because I'm safe at home. And so what I do is I dismiss my grief, or I disenfranchise my grief, and instead I try to bury those feelings, and I don't want to be present with them. All right. So disenfranchised grief, right? This is a definition. We wrestle with the fact, or we wrestle with the question: is what I'm going through really a loss? We often try to find other labels to describe our grief in order for us to avoid the pain. And so if I can have depression, then I don't have to work on my heart. They can give me pills for my head. If I have anxiety, that's not a heart issue, that's a head issue. If I just need to take a vacation and relax, then that's a health issue. But for many of us, we're grieving and we don't want to put the language to it, because in order for us to name it as grief, we have to then enter it, right? We then have to be able to see it. We won't be able to avoid the pain, right? We also our grief can also be disenfranchised because we ask ourselves, will anyone care? Right? No one will respond ever perfectly to your grief. People don't know how to deal with individuals who are grieving. And so you have to be honest and open with people who, if you are grieving, try to help you. Right? If they ask you what it is that you need, come up with something that you need. If you don't know what they need, or if you don't know what to tell them, just tell them, just sit with me. Right? Because one thing you don't want to do is you don't want someone to start talking foolishness to you and telling you things that are all kinds that aren't helpful. Oh, well, you can go get another husband, or you'll meet somebody new, or you'll see them again in the resurrection. Now, that is true. The last one. Yes, I'll see the loved one that I lost in the resurrection. But what does that got to do with the fact that I got to live down here without them? That doesn't do anything for me. Yes, I know we have our hope in Jesus, and I'm not trying to rob you of your hope in Jesus, but we can't use that as a means of coping with our exigent circumstances here and now. God expects for us to work through and to deal with the grief that we're experiencing, right? I don't even know how I got into all that. All right, it's not death, so no one wants to hear about it, is the last one. And I think we talked about, or at least we touched a little bit on this. So how has COVID, and I wanted to just share this with you all, how has COVID impacted individuals? Let me move my face off the screen so that you all can see better. All right, how has COVID impacted individuals? We've seen an increase in fear and anxiety. One of the biggest challenges that we've had during COVID was not being able to participate in conclusionary rituals. And now, as the churches are coming back together, there are some people missing that we didn't get a chance to say goodbye to, right? Right. We've had non-traditional holiday gatherings. If I'm single and I'm living at home, I've had to date through Zoom, unless you were, brave and you went out in the heights of COVID and anyway, neither here nor there, right? So there's been an increased amount of pressure to be more productive even during this time, right? And so we know that COVID has had a deleterious effect on individuals who are grieving, especially as it relates to disenfranchised grief, right? So there are some realistic expectations that we need to sort of talk about in the grieving process. And I'm going to throw these on the screen, and I'm not even going to talk about them because I'm sure you all have heard them before. These are Kubler-Ross's stages of grief, and these are William Worden's tasks of mourning. I'm putting them on the screen because for many people, they utilize these as a framework to experience or to talk about their grief. I do not like them. Why do I not like them? I'm going to tell you in a second. Let me put this on the screen so you can see. Grief is personal and experienced by each griever differently. There's no prescription for how we grieve, just like there is no prescription for how we love. Two people can grieve the exact same person and their grief looks different because we don't grieve people, we grieve relationships. We don't lose people, we lose relationships. Relationships change. And so because our relationships are different, we're going to grieve differently. And so I know we talked about yesterday finding our own unique language to sort of deal with our problems. This is another case where I feel that each of us has to dig deep to find our own language to describe how it is we feel, because not all of us are going to be in denial about our losses. Not everybody is going to be angry. Not everyone is going to bargain with their losses or seep into depression and then have to eventually move toward acceptance. Not everybody does that. As a matter of fact, Kubler-Ross, she did her research on people who were dying, not people who have lost individuals, right? But yet we still utilize these stages of grief, right? The tasks of mourning. Now, Worden's tasks of mourning are a little bit more useful to people, where we move from accepting the reality of the loss to processing or experiencing the grief and adjusting to the world without the deceased, and then finding a way to sort of develop a new world or a new connection or find an enduring connection with the person that we've lost, right? But I want us to sort of understand and realize, and I'm going to put this back on the screen. I want us to understand and realize something that I think is very important. Your grief may take longer than what people think. Let me put myself on there, right? Your grief may take more energy than you've ever imagined. Your grief may involve many changes and will continually develop over time. Your grief will grow and it will shrink. It will grow and it will shrink. It will be up and it will be down, right? Your grief may also show itself in different spheres in your life. Right? Your grief will also depend on how you perceive your loss. Your grief may entail mourning, not just for the actual person you lost, but also for the hopes and dreams and unfulfilled expectations that you held for and with that person. So not only do I have to grieve the physical loss, I grieve the fact that I can no longer reach those expectations, right? Your loss may also resurrect old feelings and unresolved conflict from the past, right? You may have trouble thinking sometimes about the memories that you held because the grief will be so present with you. But one of the things that we do in order for us to heal our hearts, and let me put them on the screen, the way we heal from grief is we can't go through our lives without experiencing loss. We need to give ourselves time and space to mourn. Now, it's not the time that's going to solve the problem, but we need to take time with our grief. We need to, instead of pushing the grief away, we need to enter into the sadness and bring it in. Now, how do we bring in the sadness? There's no way that if I lose someone that's important to me, I'm not going to be sad in that loss. But many times what we don't want to do is we don't want to relive the experiences. We don't want to spend our time thinking about how much we miss that person. But what if I told you that the only way for you to move beyond the sadness of that loss, you'll never move beyond the loss itself, but the sadness of the loss is to bring it in, is to sit with it in the dark, is to sit with the pain, is to sit with the range of emotional responses that you go through with the pain, right? The only way for me to deal with it is to get in community with other people who can listen to me. The only way that I can deal with it is if I find a way to express those unresolved emotional or unexpressed emotional communications that I wanted to have with the person that I lost, right? So there's always things that I wish I could have said, or things I wish I could have done, or things I needed to apologize for, or things that I needed to ask forgiveness for, right? We all have those things. So what do I do with all of that? I have to find a way to put it into language and to express it and to get it out so that it doesn't just sit with me in my dreams. It doesn't just sit with me as I'm at a dinner table. It doesn't just flood the room when our families get together, right? And this is just coming to my mind. It's not something that I had in my notes, but for many of us, Thanksgiving is around the corner. And for some of us, this is the first holiday that we have. This is the first holiday that we're going to have without our loved ones. You know, the president talks a lot. Joe Biden talks a lot about the empty chair at the table. And the reality is, for many of us, there's going to be an empty chair. And I would suggest to you that instead of acting like that person isn't there, or acting like you all have to deal with it as if the person is not there, why don't you put the empty chair there? So that, not that we can memorialize, or not so that we can be metaphysical in our response to the grief, but we can understand and realize that the person has a space in our heart, and we can acknowledge that space in our heart in community when we're around our family, right? So even as you approach this holiday season, don't spend too much time trying to push the memory of the person out of the conversation or out of the room, thinking that you're going to darken the conversation or darken the room. No, share your stories, share your memories, share your pain, share your joys. Life has a duality to it. It's joy and sadness. It's happiness and it's pain. It's light and it's dark. And so bring it all in together so that we can experience life with honesty. And the honest thing is, yes, we're so excited to be together as a family, but it really does stink that mama's not here. It does actually stink that my sister is not here, right? So bring it in. Don't try to just ignore it, but bring it in. All right. So here's my last slide. How do we help ourselves and others as we go through grief? Let's see where I can put myself on the screen. I guess I can go there. No, well, anyway, I'll go there. How do we help ourselves and others? How can we engage in self-care for grief, right? Now, some of these things we've talked about ad nauseum, but here they are again. There's a physical way that we can help ourselves with grief. Developing a routine. We've talked about this. Your routine is going to help you deal with a whole host of things. If I can do it because it's time, as opposed to doing it because I feel like doing it, I oftentimes will do it, right? Exercise. Don't confuse your symptoms. There are physical responses to grief, stress. There was actually a study that linked cancer, the development of cancer to grief. Now, they didn't, study was done back in the 1990s, and they didn't do anything with it. But there are a bodily response and somatic responses to grief, right? So how do we help ourselves cognitively? We have to be intentional about giving ourselves a break. Not only a break from the hustle and bustle of life, but we also have to give ourselves a break from the guilt that we may feel. Right? Accept the fact that you are human. Accept your humanity. You're not responsible for other people's choices, right? Control the negative thoughts that may try to seep in, right? Asking the negative thoughts. Is this really true? Is this honest? Like, okay, what are these negative thoughts trying to tell me, right? Where's the evidence that I have to support these negative thoughts that are creeping in my mind? All right? Okay, what else we got here? There is also a social element to this, right? The emotional element to it, right? Be honest with yourself about how you feel. We talked about self-soothing. It also works here. We talked about self-soothing yesterday. Go get that tape. We talked about it yesterday. It also is helpful here, right? This next one, fight the urge to, sorry, no. Find a way to record your feelings. Journaling is very important. Having conversations with the person through in your journal as if they were there. We know they're not there. It's not for them. It's for you, right? If there are apologies that you have to make, well, sitting down and working through and writing out those apologies. It's not for them. It's for you. If you have significant emotional statements that you need to make, it's writing them out and getting them down so that it helps you to heal. And then I'm not saying, I don't want you to just put the journal aside and don't ever come back to it, but come back to it. Read about your progress and read through your progress, right? And then there's some social aspects of it. Find a grief support group. There's a wonderful program that churches can do. It's called Grief Share. It's a 13-week program that comes with videos and a workbook. You sit down. It may be even something you could do as a Sabbath school class. You get Grief Share. You sit down. You play the videos. You talk about it together with the participant guide. There's the Grief Recovery Institute. There's Divorce Care. There's all kinds of resources for you to get together in community to find a grief support group. Right? Make sure you don't withdraw from friends. Like I told you, when you're suffering with a loss, people don't know what to say. They say a lot of unhelpful things. Don't say, well, none of my friends understand me. It's not that they don't understand. No one understands what you're uniquely going through because no one has the relationship that you're grieving, right? Your grief is personal. We talked about that, right? And so fight the urge to grieve alone. Fight the urge to grieve alone. If you find yourself being isolative, if you find yourself not wanting to be around people, understand that that is the grief talking, and the grief wants to grow itself. And so the more it can get you to be socially distant, the greater the grief will be. And then this is the very last thing I want to talk to you about. I want you to know that if you're grieving, you're not alone. The Bible is very clear that even God himself grieves, and that God responds to our grief. And for those people that feel like they don't understand or no one understands their grief, I can guarantee you that God understands, because God himself even experienced the grief of reaching for his son and the separation between him and his son that still has not been recovered. The relationship between God and Jesus is different because Jesus came to this earth. He didn't return home the same person. There's a grief that God understands. He knows and he understands. There's nothing that it touches our human hearts that God does not understand, that God cannot hear, that God cannot heal. And so I want you to just be reminded and understand and realize what I put on the screen initially. God isn't absent as we go through our problems. He's there. He's there to comfort us. He's there to guide us. But then make sure you also understand that you're not alone, that there's others in your circle, there's others that can help you walk through this. Hopefully you got something from this, and I'll see you all on tomorrow as we talk about addictions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Defoe. You very gently moved us from the Zoom space onto the clinician's couch. We not only felt your professionalism, but we felt your heart. Mm. And we needed this tonight. We needed this discussion. We needed this information that you have shared with us. It's been therapeutic across this virtual platform. It jumped across electrical devices, and it entered right into our hearts and into our homes. And we deeply, deeply appreciate it. Jose, if it's possible, I'd like to know if we could put this presentation into the chat tomorrow, or to make sure, Katrina, that if we're able to do it, that we send it out to everyone who has shared with us, their email address so we can just kind of take time and to go back through it at our own pace and at our own rate. But we have been tremendously helped tonight, Dr. Defoe. And again, not only did we feel your professionalism, that this is an area where you have done a lot of thinking, a lot of working, but we also felt your heart coming out to us, and that made us feel very good tonight. I don't know any other way to do it other than, oh, your mom says, hello, son, blessings. I don't know any other way to do it than to conclude this with a word of prayer. And of course, I will say, as I always do, what a wonderful God that we serve, that he desires that we should prosper in all things, even in the area of our health, not only mental. Someone else is saying, thank you, Dr. Defoe. This evening was truly a blessing. All right. But beloved, I wish above all things that thou mayest prosper and be in health all the way around, even as our soul prospers. So I'm ending it just a little bit differently this evening, and I'm going to end it with a prayer. Heavenly Father, we have been drawn front and center with our great reality. As I look around this Zoom room, I know that there are hearts that still are in a state of grief, and we cannot be completely satisfied. There is no shelf life on the depth at which we miss those that we love, and the desire that we have to see that empty seat at the table filled again. We thank you so much for Dr. Defoe and how he has ministered to our souls tonight, has encouraged us, given us just a little bit of more wind under our wings, help us to be able to make another step forward. Now, I want to ask your consoling presence. You said you would be our shepherd, that you lift us up on every leaning side, and we have felt that need for your comfort and your presence tonight, and you said you would be there. And so I ask you would stand by each of us tonight, according to our need and the ongoing journey that sets before us, that you promise one day you will bring us endless joy, and we look forward to that. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, beloved, as we say all the time, the Lord wishes above all things that we may prosper and be of health, even as our souls prosper. Good night, everyone.